booster training. It has been so amazing. We're psyched for today. And we just want to say welcome back to all our colleagues who are joining us from Colorado, from Vermont, Minnesota, New York, Ohio, and of course, Massachusetts. Again, we're so happy to have you here. As a reminder, you will receive a link to today's meeting afterwards, as well as the PowerPoint slides and a handout. If you're a psychologist and a social worker and you wish to receive CEUs for today's training, please email our colleague Amy Pepperora. I didn't practice, sorry, Amy. Amy, who will put her email in the chat today. And then that's it. All right, so things to have on hand today. Of course, we love it if you have the book and the workbook. They can be handy as you're thinking through things, water and snacks. We have a lot of different forms and guides that we're going to be going over today. So I've listed them here. Oh, except for they're all listed as Appendix 3, which is inaccurate. We'll put those correct ones in the chat. But we have a regulation focus guide, which is Appendix 3, the safety focus guide, the regulation focused activities, the managing your emotions guide, and the helpers guide. Those are all in the end of the workbook for your reference. And then of course we have a Tier 3 booster training handout for today. Thank you, Saweet, for putting that together. And that's really to help anchor you in our discussion and give you a place to write notes. So hopefully you have those on hand. Today, simple. Today we're going to be talking about really the regulation focused phase of treatment in Tier 3. And then we're going to give a brief overview of safety focused treatment that typically happens at Tier 4. All right, so review of day 2 on day 3, right? Again, now it's time for our pop quiz. You will not be graded, so do your best. All right, first question. In TSTR, we talk about the grid, putting the kid on the grid. What are the 2 areas assessed to determine where the kid will be placed on the grid? Is it A, an individual and their social environment, B, survival states and social environmental stability, or is it emotional reactivity and social support system? Do your best. Please submit an answer. And then when we get some of maybe up to 70, so you can let us know. Okay. Again, you will not be graded. Excellent. Wow. All right. 79% of folks picked survival states and the social environmental stability, which is absolutely correct. Way to go. Okay, so we have our grid right here. And just as a quick reminder, on the right side here, we have the child survival states, which is categorized by 3 different. We have no survival states, which is when a youth is presented with a kind of a trigger or a perceived threat in their environment, they're able to respond without shifting survival states. Then we have survival states, and this is where they actually do shift in their survival states and they have some sort of reactivity, but it's not dangerous, right? And then we have dangerous survival states. Those are the 3 categories. Then we have for the social environmental stability, we define that in the top line there, and that is stable, distressed, and threatening. And that's really related to how we perceive the parent or caregiver's ability to help and protect that youth from shifting into those survival states. So stable is we have caregivers who are able to do so and are attentive and well. Distress is really where the caregivers are present and really want to, but maybe their skill set is not sufficient enough yet to be able to help that youth not shift into survival states. And then threatening is where we describe that as where there's an actual threat in the environment. All right, excellent. So question 2, we only have 2 questions, so the final question. Priority problem. So which of the following does not, I repeat, does not describe the priority problem in TSTR? An understanding of why a youth's problems are important and to whom, a trauma-informed framework for understanding why a youth acts the way they do when they're triggered, the formulation, or a tool that when built thoughtfully can be an incredible gift to the client, family, and the clinician. Which one does not describe the priority problem in TSTR? All right, how are we doing, Sweet?
We're just about ready. In a couple of seconds.
All right, a couple more. Sounds good. All right, so we have kind of a mixture. And I think this is because it's worded as a does not describe, but we have 50% said the formulation. So in fact, the priority problem is the one that does not describe the priority problem is the first one, A, an understanding of why a youth's problems are important and to whom is what we call sources of pain in trauma systems therapy for refugees, so in TSTR. So really, the priority problem is a trauma-informed framework for understanding why a youth acts the way that they do when they're triggered. It is the formulation, and it is a tool that when built thoughtfully can be an incredible gift to the client, family, and clinician. So just as a review, when we think about the priority problem, we're thinking about it's really defined as a pattern of links between a traumatized youth's perception of threat in their environment in the present moment. So call it these boxes on the left-hand side, and the youth's transition to survival states so this is on the right-hand side. So we look at the patterns by bringing these together, the present environment and the shifts in survival, the reaction, and we bring those together as the pattern. So this is the priority problem worksheet that helps us pull together and really helps us connect the dots of the youth story, just like we had talked about. So again, it's the formulation in TSTR. The priority problem is the formulation. It's a trauma-informed framework for understanding why the youth is acting the way that they do. And it is also a gift that can be provided to the clinician and to the family when done thoughtfully. All right, I'll turn it over to Luna.
Thank you, Alicia. We're just going to pull up the slides again and start with tier 3, regulation-focused phase of treatment. Okay, so in regulation-focused phase of treatment in tier 3, we are in this phase if we have determined, right, during the assessment process that the social environment is safe enough. Right. So this is really, really critical in terms of how we determine what phase of treatment that we're in. So if the home environment or the school environment, if there are any active or immediate threats, so for example, like an abusive caregiver, we would be in the safety-focused phase of treatment, right? Also, if we have concerns around the child's survival state response, right? So for example, suicide, right? A suicidal ideation, suicidal thoughts, a plan, then we would be in the safety-focused phase of treatment. And in that phase, we're going to talk about the safety-focused phase later today. But in that phase, that's really where we are much more intimately involved with the family and other important adults in the child's life. And we may need to bring in other outside agencies, other professionals, other institutions to maintain safety. But in tier 3, right, we're going to start with talking about this phase. In regulation-focused phase of treatment, most of the work is working individually with the child, right, with the youth, with the teenager. And, every week we're meeting with this child for individual therapy focused on teaching emotion regulation skills. And of course, we know that just working with the child alone is not going to have lasting impact or lasting change, right? Adults are so critical in the child's life. So caregivers, adults in school. And so a big part of this work in Tier 3 is also collaborating consistently with caregivers, with other adults in that child's life, right? So whether that is every few weeks, every month, we can discuss, frequency, but the work with the adults also is really important in this phase of treatment. And we're going to show some more of a video for how to do that when you're in Tier 3. So just going back to Maria. So Maria is the case example that we're going to continue to use throughout today. But Maria is a child, we know that there are safety concerns. She was initially referred for TSTR services because the school was concerned around safety at home. Child Protective Services was called. So Maria is a child who is definitely in the safety-focused phase of treatment in Tier 4. And the team also determined that this is a child who would benefit from getting regulation-focused treatment as well, Tier 3, right? So Maria is somebody who's in both phases of treatment, which is very common for kids to receive both. And so we're going to kind of walk through both phases of treatment today and what that looks like. When you're in Tier 3, let's say you have a child that's just getting regulation-focused phase of treatment, we know that working with caregivers, working with adults is so critical when working with children. And so it's okay to draw on interventions, forms, and guides from Tier 4, right? So it's not as clean of a split. In that when you're working with kids, you're always going to be working with adults as well. But in Tier 4, we're just much more intimately involved in the home with the family dynamics. And we'll talk more about that later. So for right now, we're doing regulation-focused phase of treatment. Next slide. Okay, so in terms of who does what in the dyadic relationship, first, if the child's English level abilities, right, their ability to speak English is less than proficient, the cultural broker is involved in all of the sessions, right? The cultural broker is there every week with the clinician, meeting together with the child, right? To interpret, to translate, to provide that cultural lens, which is the case with Maria. But if we have a child that is proficient in English, maybe they've been in the US for a long time, maybe they grew up here, then the cultural broker does not need to be there every single session. But, right, best practice, we know culture is relevant and part of the air that the child is breathing at home. And so we still want to make sure that the culture broker is still peripherally involved, right? So the collaboration consultation still needs to happen between the dyad. So in terms of who does what, here's the review of the Venn diagram. In Tier 3, the cultural broker takes the lead, right? They do everything together, but in terms of who takes the lead, the cultural broker takes the lead in facilitating parental consent, providing cultural concepts and framing for clinical content, and then of course, providing translation and interpretation for the clinician as needed. And then the clinician takes the lead in all of the clinical aspects of the work. And then together, we're always integrating the clinical and the cultural lens, facilitating engagement, explaining the need for clinical services, and facilitating and participating in meetings with families and caregivers. And then, of course, with before and after every clinical encounter, every session, every phone call, best practice is that the clinician and culture broker meet beforehand and afterhand. To plan and to debrief, and we'll show some more videos of what that looks like later today. Next slide. Okay, so there are 3 parts, so 3 components of the regulation-focused phase of treatment. So the first piece is building awareness. And so this is really helping the child develop a common understanding of survival states, right? So another way to say that is teaching emotion identification skills. And we'll kind of practice how to do some of that in a little bit. The next component is applying awareness. And this is teaching the child building skills to prevent or manage survival states. So teaching healthy coping skills, right, is another way to say that. And then spreading awareness. So this is where all the other important adults becomes really important, ensuring that the right people in the social environment have the information that they need to help the child. So sharing information with important adults. So those are the three big pieces, and we're going to walk through all of these pieces today. And here are the clinical tools that we're also going to walk through today. And it's also in your day 3 handout. We have the regulation focused guide, regulation focused exercises or activities, and then we also have the managing emotions guide. So those 3 guides and tools are the 3 really important tools that you're going to need for this phase of treatment. And here is a screenshot of the RFG, the regulation focused guide. Really helpful to use this with your treatment team, bring it to supervision. When you're in this phase of treatment, it's really helpful to just have this anchor, what you're going to actually do. Why are we in this phase and what are we going to do? Everything that you do with a child needs to be intentional. And so having this as a starting point is really, really helpful. Bring it to us when you guys are in consultation calls with us. But essentially what this form and guide walks you through, and open it up, it's in the handout, just kind of skim through it right now. But what it does is it walks you through things like documenting the moment by moment assessments that you're going to be doing with the child, what activities that you can use to teach healthy coping skills, strengths, right? In any trauma-informed care, we want to identify strengths and build on strengths. So what are strengths that the child already has that we can build on, and then how to incorporate caregivers into the treatment. And also, it also talks about medication and psychopharmacology also as part of this phase and how to incorporate that. So we'll walk through this guide, through pieces of this guide today. Okay, so regulation focused sessions. Can you go to the next slide? So this is outpatient, so it can be either school-based or office-based, again, focused on building emotion identification and coping skills. It's focused on reducing triggers in the social environment. If we know what the triggers are, we can help to try to reduce them. And then a big part of this phase is also helping caregivers notice signs of distress or revving. So remember the 3 A's across the 4 R's when the child starts to go into that revving, right? That revving phase of regulation. How can other people notice that that's happening? How can the child notice? How can other adults notice? And then what can everybody do differently? So this is really the point of intervention that we want to hone in on, and then create interventions, develop interventions so that something different happens. So the child doesn't end up keep doing the same thing that gets him into trouble or leads to such negative outcomes. And then, of course, the clinician and culture broker should take time to plan and talk through each session and make time for debrief after each session as well. Okay, so when working with kids who have trauma histories, it becomes particularly important to provide a safe space where every session prioritizes safety, consistency, predictability, of course, empathy and attunement. So we want to try to create sessions where kids know what's expected of them. They know what's going to happen. So starting off in a similar way, like having that structure, having a middle point and having a similar way to end really creates that consistency and predictability that's so essential for kids who have trauma histories. We want to be attuned to their needs, right? And so we may have an agenda or an activity, but we want to be attuned to where the child is on that particular day, and be ready to pivot if needed. We want to follow the child or Maria's needs and make sure that she has fun. Fun is so critical. I can't emphasize this enough. These are children. We want to make sure that we build in fun every single time that we meet with the child, right? So if you're having fun, most likely the child is as well. So, games, music, art, play, whatever is fun for that child. Engagement is such a big part of the intervention. So if we can spend, a chunk of the time doing something fun with the child, then it's going to, increase the likelihood that they're going to want to keep coming back right? If they don't come back, we can't do any of the intervention. So we want to make sure that they keep coming back. And a big part of that is for the kids to understand, why are we meeting? How is this going to help them in their life, in their goals, getting to their goals? And is this fun? And so it's a big part of what we want to be thinking about. And so this is a really, a time to get creative and do something that's going to increase engagement. Creating a space, having a nice space where Maria can explore and express herself through sports, if that's what she's into, art, music, play. We know that she loves music, so we're going to try to bring that in. Other mediums like videos, things like that. Things that we know that the child loves, we want to incorporate into our meetings as much as possible. Okay, so, and of course, we want to, in addition to fun and engagement, we also want to teach skills, right? So skill building activities every single time that you meet. And so building awareness. So this is the first component, emotion identification skills, to support observing and naming feelings, different emotions, emotion identification and bodily sensations, and then expressing of those feelings, right? So for kids to identify what's going on for them internally, and then how do we teach them how to express that, communicate that with others, so that their needs are being met in a way that is healthy, right? That's ultimately the goal of this phase of treatment. And so much of what Maria needs is to be able to express what's going on for her and communicate that so that others can help her get her needs met. And that's so much of what our kids need. And so that's a big part of what happens in this phase of treatment. And now I will pass it over to Jeff.
Great, thanks, Luna. And thanks everyone for being here. For those that don't know me, I'm Jeff Winter. I'm a psychologist at the Trauma and Community Resilience Center, one of the TSDR consultants. And so as Luna and Alicia we're setting up today, we're talking the major component in the middle is tier 3, which is really focused on these emotion regulation focused skill building. And as Luna was saying, there's one category we want to think about it really as emotion identification skills that are really focused on helping kids and families observe, name, and express emotions, putting a label to those internal experiences. And then emotion coping skills or healthy coping skills usually focus on in 2 different categories that we'll talk about more later. One, which are relaxation focused exercises, so breathing and visualization activities. And then the other category are affect management. Affect is another term for emotions, which is around refocusing and self-coaching. So you'll see in some of the exercises, there's more of a grounding component or more of like a mindfulness component, and other things are more like cognitive coping or reappraisal, meaning like reassessing a situation in those skills. But we're first going to focus on emotion identification skills, again, identifying those internal experiences. And in order to try to do that, we're going to do some cool experiential theater. Our colleague Doris Lemus, we're going to do a stage reading of like an emotion identification practice. Doris is going to play Maria, and then I'm going to play a clinician. And what we're going to be doing is an exercise based on like an emotions chart or an emotion facial tool. So just to orient, while we're going through this, imagine Doris and I are in like the office setting that Luna was just setting up. This is a situation where the session will be conducted in English. So Maria is comfortable enough to conduct session in English. I'm speaking English as the clinician, but I've been working with a cultural broker and consulting on how to engage in this session. So although there's not a cultural broker in the session and the session is in English, a cultural broker has been involved in this case. And imagine that in this scenario, Doris and I have like a worksheet. This is what's in the office, and this is what we're sort of orienting around. So if and when I'm saying, what do you see, or what face or whatnot, this is what I'm pointing to, this kind of document. There are tons of these online if you want to download different things. The main goal of these kind of documents, these emotion charts, are facial expressions of emotions. And they can have the words in English or another language or not. So that's the main anchor there. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to share a script so you can follow along with the text as well, what we're basically reading. So just give me one moment. Okay, can people see? No, let me get that. Okay, I got it. You should see it in. There you go. Can you see a Google Doc? It says role play 1 at the top. Okay, awesome. So what Doris and I are going to do, they're going to walk through this, and I'll scroll down, and then you all have access to this script as, again, just like an example of a emotion identification practice. Again, I'm playing the clinician. Doris is playing Maria, who you've all been introduced to before. And so, as I was also saying, just imagine that Maria and I have worked together. This isn't our first session. We've done some skill building before, because before you do this kind of practice, you have to have some amount of rapport, some amount of sort of relational closeness. You'll see also that as we go through it, that Maria is not saying, yes, Jeff or Jack or whatever the clinician name is, Janet. I'm super excited about this. You'll see that she's a bit hesitant. Okay. Doris, are you ready to go?
I am.
Okay, awesome. So here we go. Here is our scene. Maria, as we talked about last week, today we're going to practice an exercise that can help you identify how you're feeling, both when you feel upset or have like really big emotions, and then times when you feel calm and more connected.
Okay.
So take a look at this emotions chart. On it, you'll see lots of different kids' faces. How we feel on the insides, like our emotions and our thoughts, it often shows up on our face, although not always, but often. And are there any faces on this sheet that maybe you feel a lot at school?
I don't know.
That's okay. So last week you talked about a time when you and your history teacher had kind of a miscommunication. It sounded like she wanted you to do work and you had trouble telling her you needed a short break since you'd been working hard on another project. Do you remember us talking about that?
Yeah.
So if you think about that time, you try to bring yourself back to that moment, what were you feeling inside? And maybe how did it show up on your face? Or did you have any other sensations in your body?
I think I was confused. Then I was angry and I started to get a headache.
Yeah. Often we might feel angry after another feeling. Why do you think you were feeling confused?
I worked hard and I finished my assignment. Then she wanted me to start something else new.
And how did that make you feel? What other faces might be in this story or from what you remember?
I was disappointed. I wanted to rest. I had been up late the night before, working with my mom. And I think I also felt nervous because all of a sudden it started to seem like I was getting into trouble. So I put my head down.
So it sounds like in a matter of a few minutes, you felt confused, angry, disappointed, and nervous. Those 4 on this chart. Is that correct?
I guess.
Yeah, and the more we can start to identify the emotions we feel, and you did a great job with this, the more we can start to figure out how to express them and to navigate them.
Yeah, maybe.
Scene. Okay, awesome. Great job, Doris. Thanks. So I'm going to pull the slides back up. Okay, can folks see these slides? Okay. And as we were, if people have any comments or reflections, feel free to put them in the chat. We'll have more time for dialogue a little bit later. and again, in that role play, if there were things that I was doing that you thought were effective, great, do that. If there are things that I was doing, you're like, oh, I didn't think that was very effective, then use your clinical wisdom to build upon that. There's lots of ways of trying to deliver this content. Again, the key is trying to help give kids and families agency to identify what's happening so they can understand where they go from there, whether it's skills on their side or communication, which is a type of skill. And so this one just highlighted in the bold is that's an emotions chart. And there's lots of different activities that you can do to do emotion identification skills. Like Luna was saying, there's like a lot of art, there's the science that sets the base for TSTR, and then the implementation is a lot of the creativity and art and the fun of working with kids and trying to help kids build lives of meaning and purpose by doing fun, goofy exercises that are actually very important to human success and thriving. So activities are, let's look at this magazine and pick up people who look happy. So that's an emotion identification focused on positive affect identification. Let's listen to a song that makes you happy. So that can be a mood induction, and also can bring on like, oh, when this happens, like when I'm listening to this teeny song, I feel happy, I feel excited. Oh, let's look in the mirror. Oh, what does your face look like? These really foundational things can be very helpful. And a lot of kids may have not had the opportunity to think sort of deeply in that way about emotions. What's your favorite TV show or movie? Let's watch a little, and then again, identify emotions within that. Acting on a scene, again, all these ways into identification. And then some tips down here. You can do this for each emotion, both ones that a kid may be more familiar with or experience a lot, or ones that are newer or a little bit more complicated. So things like happy, angry, or sad are usually like an easier point of entry. Things like maybe a little more complicated, like shame or guilt or jealousy, can be important trauma triggers, but they often maybe put those a little bit later because there's often a little more complexity with those. And then clinician and culture broker must practice through a role plays beforehand. So the more that, if you're working dyadically in the session, clinician and cultural broker around different terms or interpretations or translations of different terms or ideas. And now I will pass it back over to Luna.
Great, thank you. So I also like to have lots of visuals just in the therapy space that I'm using, posters, different tools to demonstrate emotions, identify emotions. And here, a thermometer can be a really cool tool just to identify like how much of a particular emotion the child might be feeling, right? So anger is one that we get all the time, and we know there's, there's lots of stuff underneath the anger, and we'll definitely get to that. But at this stage, when we're just starting to introduce emotion identification skills, how angry, right? And kind of rating that, this 1 to 10 scale using a thermometer, and then what they were doing at each level can be really helpful just to show that, how much of a particular emotion you were feeling, and being able to identify that and talk through that. And so a thermometer is a good way to do that. Next slide. So I usually like to start each session in tier 3 with kids with just like a check-in, like how was your week? How are things at school? How are things at home? Maybe a specific incident where, that was really good, the best moments, the hardest moments, what, just like a check-in with an older kid. They can talk and take 10 minutes to just kind of start that way. With younger kids, it's a little bit harder. There's a lot of, I don't know, I don't remember, fine, good. And so one thing that could be really helpful, this is an activity that you can do with younger kids to teach some of these skills, or just to even start off the session checking in. But this is a color your heart activity. And I do this alongside them. So, having a big poster board, lots of, coloring utensils, and then drawing a heart, and then with a little key with a bunch of different emotions. And, how much of these different emotions are you feeling right now in the moment? It's a nice way to check in to see where they are. You do it too, so you can kind of model it for them. But this is a really nice, cool activity that you can do to show that you can feel lots of different things at any moment, or you can have lots of different emotions about a specific incident or a specific person in your life, right? Like love, anger, kids who have trauma histories, all of that is really blended in, and it's really confusing. And so this is a really cool tool to show that, you can feel lots of different things at one point, or about one person. And this is like a nice visual to show that. In TSTR, what we have this acronym called the EDWS, which is part of building awareness. This is called identifying the earliest detectable warning sign. And it is another really important piece of building an awareness. And this is where we teach kids the first thing that they notice when something was different, when something shifted, when they were about to go into that revving state. So perhaps a feeling in their body, maybe a sight or a sound or a smell, something that they noticed that was a slight shift. And we're gonna watch a video later where we, the clinician and cultural broker, are asking Maria specifically about this, the EDWS, the earliest detectable warning sign, which is another important skill that if the kids can tune into their self, into their internal self and notice this, then they can more actively begin to use, their healthy coping skill, whatever that might be for that child. Okay, so we show this moment by moment. This is a moment by moment form that was filled out. We showed this, I believe it was on day 1 for a specific incident that Maria had talked about that took place in class, the pencil incident, right? And if you take a look at this moment by moment, right, when the clinician cultural broker were asking Maria questions, this is during the assessment phase, so very early on, you can see there were a lot of holes, right? So you can see in the regulated, the R, the first R, she was able to say that she was sitting in class, she was feeling calm, but then the awareness, right? What were you thinking? What were you paying attention to? That's blank. I don't know. You got a lot of I don't knows in the beginning with kids, and that's okay. Or I don't remember. If you look at the revving, right, when they're about to start to get upset, there's a few more holes, right? We've got, he threw the pencil, that's why I got upset, feeling mad, annoyed, worried, but then the awareness and action, what exactly were you thinking? What were you paying attention to? And then what did you do? Those were, I don't know, I don't remember. And then you go into the re-experiencing where they lost control. And this is what a lot of people remember. But Maria, I don't know, I don't really remember, not sure. The awareness again is blank. But then she did remember that she was yelling, swearing, and then she put her head down on the table and fell asleep. And the reconstituting, those are all filled in. So very common to have lots of holes. And really the work of tier 3, regulation focused phase of treatment, is to try to fill in those holes so that over time, kids can better, be more aware of what's going on for them when different things happen in their lives, be able to articulate it, be able to express it, and then be able to get their needs met again in ways that are healthy. Next slide. So after teaching building awareness skills, ideally, what we would hope for Maria is for her to be able to identify emotions over a wide range of situations, right? She'll be more able to and more aware of when she is triggered and why, right? How it's connected to her history, how it's connected to her past. And then she'll also be more able to express her emotions with others, right? So for the role play that we just heard, right? Maria was having all these feelings, right? In her history class, but she wasn't really able to express that with her history teacher. She wasn't able to say, this is what's going on for me. Can I please take a break? Or, she wasn't able to use her words and navigate that situation in a healthy way. And then she ended up doing things that ended up getting her into trouble. So we want to teach kids how to respond and regulate their emotions, and then make choices that's going to lead to a healthier outcome. So ideally, that's what we would hope for Maria, and that those are some of the skills that we're going to be teaching her in tier 3. And then, so if you look at this, this is, moment by moment assessment form that is more completed after months of treatment, after months of tier 3 regulation focused treatment. You can see that it's a little bit more filled in, right? And so you can see that in the R, the first R, the very same incident, but the awareness piece is filled out where she could say that when she was regulated, she was calm, she was able to listen to the teacher, and she was just sitting, right? And then when she started to rev, when she started to get upset, what was happening? He threw the pencil, she was mad, annoyed, worried. She was able to say that now she was no longer able to pay attention, right? Her awareness had shifted, and now she's focusing on trying not to get hit, right? If you think about that, that directly relates to her trauma history, so it makes sense. And then the action is that she stopped paying attention to the teacher, right? And then in re-experiencing here, if you take a look what she said here, it's a little bit more filled in, but she said that she was not sure exactly what happened between the revving and the re-experiencing, which is very common, like so much is happening internally. And so this is a place where you can give a menu of options. You know, other kids that I've worked with have said that they blacked out, they forgot, or maybe they were so angry that, you know, their heart started beating faster, they started to get sweaty. You know, I wonder if any of those things are true for you. And so in this situation, she said that she was mad, annoyed, worried. Her awareness was that she was focused more on stopping this kid from hurting someone. And then she was yelling, swearing at him. And then she put her head down on the table and fell asleep. And then the reconstituting, she ended up, you know, getting sent to the nurse. She missed class. And so, you know, ideally, we want them to be able to really articulate what was going on for them internally during each of the R's and each of the A's. And then if you look at the bottom section here, which I don't think we talked about last time, but the bottom section is just a couple of questions that walks you through just thinking through with your dyad partner or in supervision, this particular incident. Was this a trauma response? Was this a survival state response? Because we know that kids can have lots of behaviors and may not be directly related to their trauma histories or their, it might not be a survival state response. It could be another diagnosis that we haven't talked about. There could be something else going on. So this is an opportunity to just kind of think through, is this a survival state response? And if it is, great, you know, we're gonna frame it and we're gonna formulate it in that way. But if it's not, if it's maybe something else like bipolar or maybe, you know, a spectrum disorder or something like that, then obviously we want to think about that, consider that, and make note of that and see if something else, you know, something else needs to be part of the treatment plan as a result of that. All right, so I'm going to pause there and pass it back to Jeff.
Great, thanks, Luna. And now we're shifting towards the applying and spreading awareness phases of this type of treatment. And again, this is how do people really put this into action? One of the most common challenges for implementation for kids and families of TSDR and any behavioral health service is, you know, you're learning the things and then, well, when I need it, I can't use it, or how do I know when to do it, or those kinds of questions. And so this is really helping people build the skills so that way when they need it, they can use it. Because if we're helpful in session, that's great. But what we're really trying to do is help people when they're out in the world. They're having you know, early warning signs and they can utilize skills. So just a couple of things for framing. This is sort of sample language for framing some of this content that you could use in session. So one idea is healthy versus less healthy coping. So everyone feels stressed at times. There are some ways to respond to that stress that are healthy and help us reach our goals. There are other ways that are less healthy and often cause more problems. And so framing it in this, you know, trying to reduce stigma, normalizing it. All human beings utilize coping strategies or tools to navigate stressful situations and trying to frame that. And so then identifying what are things that are more healthy, more effective, you know, whatever term is helpful, and then things that are less effective or less healthy. So more helpful would be positive self-talk or breathing, less healthy, less effective, substance misuse, self-harming, running away, which are common, less effective strategies in trauma response. Second one here is skills client already uses. So one of the cool things for TSDR or for, again, behavioral health services in general, a lot of these technologies are inside of us already to utilize. We just have to help kids and families put pieces together so that way they can access them, you know? So you probably do things already that help you when you're upset. What are they? And this is an opportunity to try to see like, what are they already doing? And then how's that working? Because a kid may say, oh, you know, when I'm really angry, I punch a pillow and that really helps me. Maybe that's helpful. There may be an opportunity to shape that or shift that where it's like, that's, you know, better than punching the wall. And there may be something that we can do even better or more effective than that. Again, shaping over time. But a strengths-based approach is meeting kids where they're at and trying to build from what they're already using and then what's realistic in their environment. Then skills adults use in their life. So this is around relational or attachment modeling. So if people, what are the caregivers in their life doing? What's mom, dad, grandma, grandpa, soccer coach, whoever doing? What about your parents' caregivers or other adults in your life? What do they do when they feel stressed? And again, it's not around pointing blame or trying to be negative. It's what all human beings experience stress at different times. What do the people that you see and what do they do? And over time, how's that working? So my mom drinks tea, or my grandmother prays, or my soccer coach takes deep breaths, that kind of stuff. And so these are great to frame in session. On the clinician side or cultural broker side, often people say, I've got to practice this, or it feels awkward going through some of these things. So that, again, the more that you practice it, the less goofy or awkward it will feel. And then the more you'll start to see like, oh, wow, like that thing actually was kind of helpful. So less talking, more doing. So in the spirit of less talking, more doing, I'm going to read this description, and then Doris and I are going to do another scene 2. So this one, we're going to practice a relaxation exercise called flower and bubble wand breathing. It's a nice one. You can use it in tier 3, tier 4. Actually, people do it sometimes in tier 2 in the groups. And the framing is, I'm just going to read this here. So it's instruct youth to pick up an imaginary flower from the ground and hold it in one hand. Then ask them to pick up a bubble wand, you know, like a plastic stick that you can put fluid in to make bubbles, and hold it in their other hand. So you got flower, bubble. Guide youth to smell the flower in their hand as they breathe in deeply through their nose and then blow out the bubbles through their wand. This may seem super goofy and you might be like, oh, this is only for 5-year-olds. I've done this with people of all ages of life. And because of the grounding and the visual thing, it's a really nice grounding and breathing exercise. And so you have them repeat this slowly. So what we're going to do is Doris and I are going to now do a scene again with Maria and the clinician practicing this flower and bubble wand breathing. Let me close this. So now I'm going to do the same. Stop, share, show you the Google Doc thing. So just give me one moment. Okay, can people see that now? It says role play 2 at the top. Awesome. Doris, anything you wanted to add or extend before we go into this one?
No,
Okay.
nothing.
And just for folks, since you're here, kindly listening on the screen, I'd actually invite folks as I walk through this to try to do it on your own, you know, to follow along with as if you were the client. And then again, the more that you practice it, then it'll be easier to teach when you teach it to kids and family or your family members tonight when you're like, ooh, I got a good one. Okay, so here we go. Maria, I know we started talking about this skill a little last week, but wanted to take some time today to make sure we can learn and practice it. It's called flower and bubble wand breathing.
Okay, yeah.
So this is another one where you have to use your imagination. And you did a great job with box breathing and with mountain meditation. So this is another one that I really like. I actually used it last week when I was in traffic trying to get here, and it was really helpful.
Okay, I guess it is hard for me to remember to do this when I'm upset.
Totally, same. And that's really normal. It takes a lot of practice to build these kind of things as habits. And with practice, kind of like when you're learning English, it sort of gets easier over time and you start to see it being useful in your life.
Yeah, that's true.
So for this exercise, which I was saying is called flower and bubble wand breathing, let's each try to imagine a beautiful flower, one that when you see it, it makes you feel calm and peaceful. And now, can you imagine another thought, which is, you know, those colorful plastic sticks you use to blow bubbles? It's like a long plastic stick with a big hole at the end where the bubble liquid goes. You know those?
Oh yeah, I remember those from the carnival I went to. And yeah, I like roses. They are all over El Salvador, and people have them planted in their houses.
Oh, cool. Neat. I love hearing that. So I've got rose, bubble one. So when you're ready, Maria, if you want to look towards the ground or close your eyes and imagine holding the flower in your right hand and the bubble wand in your left hand. And now we're going to go back and forth, taking a deep breath, smelling in the flower, and then hold that breath, and then blowing all the air out through the bubble wand and kind of watch the bubbles float off. And it's okay if you want to, again, close your eyes or just take a look at the ground and really try to imagine the flower, the rose, and the bubble wand. And I'm going to do it with you. So we're going to do a couple of rounds. Ready? And here we go. Start with the flower. Okay. Let's take a break from that. What was that like for you, Maria?
That was strange.
Yeah. Gotcha. Yeah. Let's keep practicing here in our sessions. You did a beautiful job, and you can practice at home and at school. And the more you practice, trust me, the less weird it will feel, and you'll see how it's helpful. And ultimately, if you can use this instead of yelling or instead of running away, things will start to get better. Okay, and scene. And we'll go back. Cool. And again, if folks have comments or reflections, feel free to put them in the chat. And again, as you're getting practice doing these things, if you feel goofy or awkward, or you're like, oh my gosh, like this is what I'm learning to do, I'm like smelling and imagine a flower or whatever. Yes. Because if you feel goofy and awkward about it, so is the kid. And the more you can lean into that and build your confidence with that and be creative and change it up. There's so many ways of, again, the active ingredient of that is breathing in and breathing out. And with a visual anchor, I could feel even myself doing that practice, my body slowing down a little bit, which is, again, the body is set up to be able to engage with these things. So it's cool. So examples of healthy coping skills, different types of relaxation skills. So body movement, breathing, visualization, progressive muscle relaxation. You can draw from other evidence-based culture responsive interventions to utilize that. You may have learned another technique that could fit well. And again, TSDR is this beautiful umbrella where you can engage other people within that, other components in that. And then for the affect management skills, again, lots of ways to do this, be creative. Journal writing, listening to music, watching a helpful show, going for a walk, playing basketball. There's, again, lots of ways to engage in these active ingredients for kids. It can be a worksheet-based, very sort of like classic psychotherapy thing, and it can be much more experiential. Again, a common thing kids will say is like, oh, I'm not the type of person who can do breathing or sit calmly. Again, it's not a for many people, it's not comfortable or feels awkward or weird. So there's other ways of, okay, how can we do mindful walking, or how can we take a deep breath if you have a little basketball hoop in your office and shoot the hoop, or take a deep breath and draw, there's lots of ways to engage with this. Another piece that's really important to highlight is how do we curate, how do we apply these skills in settings, real life settings. And so for kids, most kids spend a lot of time at school, and there are certain emotion regulation or coping skills that are really effective in a school setting, and then some that are okay but less effective. And so what you want to do as you're engaging with kids embedded in a school setting is work closely with teachers to help the teachers understand, again, this is for Maria, trauma responses of the kid, strategies for sending signals of care, and then what coping skills work best. And so again, if you get collateral contact with folks in the environment, they may have a sense already. And so it makes your job that much easier as a clinician and cultural broker of like, oh, in math class, this is what the math teacher already does, and that works well. Or, oh gosh, in their physical education class, they tried this thing, it didn't go that well. So maybe don't start with that when you start building new skills. Some examples of school-based coping that, again, you can scaffold kid or family, and then also teachers are taking appropriate space. So thinking about the physical classroom, and if a kid is overwhelmed, is there somewhere else they can go in the classroom? Going for a time-limited walk. Time-limited, in my perspective, is important. I've done this where it's like, you can go for a walk and the kid's like, oh, great, I'm just gonna go like walk around the town for a couple of hours. Maybe not super effective, trying to figure out how do we, again, within the rules of the school, do so that way they can help regulate. Squeezing a stress ball or creating like a coping corner to write, draw, again, lots of these physical things. Another idea for applying awareness is thinking about, this is a chart that can be helpful. What are the child's strengths to manage emotion? So again, in a strengths-based framing, what does the kid already like to do? And then how can you leverage that, utilize that for emotion regulation? So if someone already likes listening to music, okay, can we use that in a situation where it would be effective? And, instead of yelling or screaming at mom, I'm going to go and listen to music. For the regulation focused exercises, then over time, the more that you can get pretty concrete with kid and family around like, what is the skill and when to use it, the more likely people are to use it. And it's like reducing the friction for engaging it with like any habit. The more that we know, okay, great, deep breathing, this is what it is, I practiced it, and then this is when I can use it. For example, oh, if I'm at school and my heart starts to beat really fast, because say that's a physical symptom that the kid becomes very aware with, great, that's when I use my deep breathing exercise. That's when I do bubble and flower breathing, or, oh, that's when I do box breathing, or that's when I do my other exercise. Guided imagery, when the teacher asks to do something that she doesn't want to do, before I respond, I do a 10-second, imagine the mountain that I loved where I grew up. They don't have to be super long, but the more that we can get kids to actively utilize them, the more likely they'll be helpful. And then grounding exercises like pressing heels into the floor, or naming objects and colors that you see in a room. That can sometimes be really helpful if people are starting to dissociate or they're really in the re-experiencing state. So when mind jumps to sad thoughts of the past, trying to anchor and ground to things right here, right now that are very solid. And then as you're building these or thinking about how do I utilize these, the more that you can then with a kid, and this comes again after a fair amount of work together, mapping on the skills within a moment-by-moment assessment. So say Luna was showing us different moment-by-moment assessments. One of the goal is if we can identify patterns of dysregulation and then understand the priority problem, then it gives us the opportunity to build in skills in these different places. So that way it reduces the likelihood that things heat up in the way that they may have used to. So this is an example. This is like a math homework situation. So imagine someone's at home working on homework. So for regulation, maybe you're thinking about over time, you're building activities that build a sense of competency, autonomy, and positive relationships. So when that's happening, this is when we're at a regulated state. This is a kid working calmly near parents on a homework, dinner time. Okay. So then that can be a situation that can be calm and then become stressful very quickly. What can you do in a revving state? Activities and approaches that help to calm and keep events in perspective. So someone saying, I hate this math homework. I'm never going to be able to do it. I'm going to fail. I might as well drop out. These kind of school anxieties. Then what are the skills? Maybe deep breathing, positive self-talk. If kid starts re-experiencing, say the math homework is activating feelings, trauma triggers related to feeling not competent or feeling like a failure or feeling that they're letting their family down. Taking space, holding an ice cube, listening to music. Again, low tech, these aren't fancy interventions. The key is actually utilizing things that are available. And then for reconstituting when things are coming back down, helping putting out plates for dinner, so a grounding thing, and then with the intention of returning back to homework. And again, kids and families may do these things naturally. So we want to highlight when things are working, and then how do we bridge when things are less effective. Then for spreading awareness, what can caregivers do to support youth at each stage of dysregulation? Similar stuff where what you're doing with the kid, there's a parallel process with the caregiver. So for regulating, plan for what caregiver and youth can do together in times of peace, playing a game, working on dinner together, going for a walk, right? Building their relationship during calm times, if they have the opportunity to do that. Revving, how can a caregiver help when a child is revving? So earliest detectable warning sign. If a kid is in a re-experiencing place and things become more dangerous, following a safety plan or following things to prevent things from getting worse. That's your main goal usually then. It's not the time for deep talking and processing. It's the time for making sure things don't get worse. And then reconstituting, how can a caregiver help youth make repairs? It may include discussion of consequences, things like that. So how do we build from this? How do we learn from this? So one tool that will help with a lot of the things that I'm talking about, and again, this is over many weeks of intervention that you can pull on these processes, is the Managing Emotions Guide that Luna mentioned earlier, the MEG, we call it. And it's a tool that provides collaborative psychoeducation about the 3 A's and the 4 R's, and then connections between triggers and survival states. So antecedent, behavior, consequences within the TSDR framework. And then it's a tool that provides strategies for preventing and managing survival states. So how do we prevent them from happening in the first place? And then if they do happen, how do we reduce the negative impact? And then how do you share, this is a really cool thing about this, how do you share this information with other people? Because kids are embedded in systems, the more that we can communicate our learning and build a team with other caregivers, other helpers in their life, the more that we can collaboratively help them build their emotion regulation skills. And with that, I will turn it back over to Luna and Amy.
All right, thank you, Jeff. So now what we're going to do is show a video clip. This is a little bit longer of a clip, and then after that, we'll take a break. But this is a video clip that demonstrates the clinician and cultural broker meeting with Maria for a tier 3 session. And then after that meeting, they're going to call mom home, and we'll demonstrate a little bit of the applying and spreading awareness pieces of this phase of treatment. So as you're watching these video clips, just a few questions for reflection, and this is also in the handout. Jot notes as you're watching. It's a lot of content, a lot happens. This video is going to be probably about 12 minutes long. So as you're watching, just pay attention to, how are the cultural broker and clinician spreading awareness with mom? Okay. And what happens when the cultural broker takes the lead? Why do you think she made that decision? When does the clinician take the lead? How does the clinician and cultural broker talk through parenting differences in the US versus in El Salvador? So they do talk about parenting, which can certainly happen in tier 3. It's, we're working with kids, so parenting is going to be a big part of that. But we're going to get to some of the parenting stuff after the break when we talk about safety-focused treatment, but it is mentioned in this video. And then how does the clinician share skills that Maria is learning in therapy? So it's the building awareness and applying awareness pieces, tier 3 with mom. So just notice how all of this is being shared with mom, okay? And then with that, I am going to share screen.
What can your mom do to help you feel better when you're feeling upset at home? Sometimes adults need to do things differently too.
¿Qué puede hacer tu mamá en los momentos que tú te sientes molesta en casa? También hay veces que los adultos necesitan hacer las cosas de diferentes métodos.
Pues ella siempre me grita y ella nunca aprecia cuando hago algo bueno.
Well, she always yells at me and she never appreciates all of the good things that I do.
So less yelling and more appreciation of the good things.
Entonces, menos gritos y más apreciación sobre las cosas buenas.
Is there anything else?
¿No hay alguna otra cosa?
Sí, ella siempre limpio y cuida a mis hermanos y hermanas en El Salvador, pero a ella no le importa esas cosas. Siempre me dice que estoy haciendo algo mal y nunca le importa.
Seguro que sientes que te echa la culpa, ¿no? She says that she's always cleaning and she would always take care of her siblings in El Salvador, but her mother doesn't seem to care about any of those things. In fact, she feels like she's always telling her she's doing something wrong. And then I can empathize, and I shared that I just asked if she felt like she was always getting blamed, and she said yes.
Yeah. We all want to be appreciated for the good things that we do. And it doesn't feel good when we're blamed for things. So I empathize too. Would you like to share that with her?
Sabemos que no se siente bien cuando uno siente que siempre están culpándote de algo. Y también ella siente ese dolor. A nadie le gustaría sentirse que siempre está culpable de algo, ¿no?
Sí.
It also sounds like you've had a lot of responsibility in El Salvador.
También parece que has tenido muchas responsabilidades en El Salvador.
Sí, es verdad.
And now that you're living at home with mom, it might help to let her know what you need.
Y ahora que estás viviendo junta con tu madre, quizás sería bueno dejarle saber a ella qué es lo que tú necesitas.
Okay.
Can we talk to your mom about ways that she can show that she appreciates the good things you do?
Podemos conversar con tu madre para hablar sobre las cosas que ella podría hacer para demostrarte que aprecia las cosas que tú haces.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so now the clinician and cultural broker are going to hold on. They're going to call mom and, basically apply and spread awareness. They're going to talk to her about what they've been working on with Maria, and just kind of share some things with her. And again, pay attention to those things that I had highlighted earlier. It's in your handout. I'm going to skip over a chunk of this particular video. It's a long video. I'm going to skip over a piece that we had already seen last time, just for time's sake. And then, but this is the piece that I'm going to skip over, is where they talk about the priority problem. And mom says, oh, she doesn't remember those things. She was too little. So I'm going to skip over that, but just to know that that's what happens in that piece that I skipped. Okay.
We've really been enjoying getting to know Maria. She's very caring and very smart.
Nos ha encantado llegar a conocer a María. Es muy considerada e inteligente.
We've been talking to Maria about what's going on at school and at home. And one of the things that she shared was that she knows she shouldn't be running out of the house, but she gets really angry and she can't help it sometimes.
Hemos estado conversando con María y nos ha contado de algunas de las cosas que están ocurriendo en casa y que sabe que no debería correrse de la casa, pero a veces se enoja mucho y no puede evitarlo.
We're working with her to try other things when she's feeling angry. And we'd like to work with you on improving your communication with her.
Estamos trabajando con ella para que pueda encontrar otros métodos y quisiéramos trabajar con usted para que podamos encontrar otras formas de mejorar la comunicación entre ustedes dos.
Pues debería escucharme. No escucha. Y no aprecia lo que estoy haciendo aquí para ganar dinero, para atraerme a los demás aquí a los Estados Unidos. La vida aquí es mejor. Y en mi cultura le pegamos a los niños cuando no escuchan. Pero ahora yo no lo hago. Estoy aprendiendo otras cosas que hacer, como quitarle el teléfono.
She should listen to me. She never listens to me. She doesn't appreciate all of the things that I do to make money. I'm trying to save up so that I can bring everybody else here. Life is much better here, but she's not appreciating of it. In my culture, we hit our kids when they don't do what we're asking them, but I'm learning new methods. I'll do things like take her phone away.
Yes, she should listen to you because you are her mother. And yes, different cultures parent differently. However, in the United States, parents are encouraged to avoid hitting their children and instead use consequences like taking away the phone or other privileges.
Sí, tiene razón. Ella debería escucharla a usted, porque usted es su mamá. Y también entendemos que hay otras culturas que tienen otros métodos de crianza. Pero aquí en Estados Unidos, nosotros animamos a los padres a evitar pegarles a los hijos y más bien utilizar métodos como quitarles sus privilegios.
We're really glad that you're trying new ways of disciplining Maria. We know it can't be easy.
Estamos muy contentas de que usted esté utilizando otros métodos para disciplinar a María. Sabemos que no es fácil.
One of the things Maria is sharing with us is that she's not trying to run out of the house and be unsafe on purpose. She's given us permission to share with you what she's feeling when she leaves.
Sabemos que María sabe que no debería estar huyendo de la casa y nos ha dado el permiso de compartir con usted qué es lo que ella siente cuando se corre de la casa.
When she feels like things are out of
So I'm going to skip over this chunk because we watched it last time, but this is where she shares the priority problem with mom. And then mom says, no, she doesn't remember those things. So just a quick recap, and then I'm going to just jump forward. Just going to jump forward.
Nos encantaría poder hacer es que usted pueda entender cómo es que se siente María para que las cosas puedan ser más tranquilas en casa.
Maria has given us permission to share with you some of the things that we've been talking about. Are you open to hearing some of those things?
María nos ha dado permiso de poder compartir con usted cuáles son algunas de las cosas que nosotros hemos hablado. ¿Usted estaría dispuesta a escuchar de qué hemos platicado?
De acuerdo.
Maria sometimes feels that she gets blamed for a lot and that she doesn't get appreciated for all the good things she does around the house.
María muchas veces siente que la culpan y que no aprecian las cosas buenas que ella hace.
¿Cómo qué?
Like what?
Like chores and other things around the house that she helps with.
Como tareas de la casa y algunas cosas más en las que ella ayuda.
¿Por qué debo de apreciar y decir buen trabajo a las cosas que espero de mis hijos?
Why should I appreciate or say good job to things that are expected of my children?
Praising and recognizing positive things that Maria is doing will help her feel good about herself, and it'll also help your relationship. And it'll also mean that she might be more likely to do more positive things and less negative things.
Reconocer y apreciar las cosas buenas que hace María la ayudará a que ella se sienta mejor de sí misma y también ayudará a la relación con usted. También generalmente resulta con que ella haga más cosas positivas y menos cosas negativas.
Así que cuando haga algo bueno, decir buen trabajo.
Sí, es un buen comienzo. ¿Recuerda alguna vez que la hayan apreciado porque trabajó duro en algo o porque hizo algo bien?
La verdad que no. Bueno, supongo que es como cuando estoy en el trabajo y me dan una propina o me dicen muchas gracias. Me siento bien.
Sí, exactamente. En los Estados Unidos, los niños están acostumbrados a recibir atención positiva en la escuela por las cosas que hacen bien y encima si eso significa comportamiento esperado. María ahora se está criando aquí en los Estados Unidos, entonces tenemos que ajustar nuestros métodos de crianza que utilizábamos en nuestro país. Y también María sabe que escaparse de la casa es un problema de seguridad muy importante. Entonces, ella está trabajando en encontrar diferentes métodos para que ya no se escape de la casa, sino utilice otro escape, otro método para su enojo.
¿Cómo qué?
Espérame, quiero traducir para Janet. Mom said that, so what, I should just say good job when she does something right. And I said that is a great start. And that, and I asked her if she remembered a time when she felt appreciated for working really hard on something or for doing something well. And she said no at first, but then remembered that at work, she does have moments where she receives tips or gets thank yous. And I said, exactly, here in the United States, the children are accustomed to receiving positive attention for doing things well, or even if it means acting or doing something that's expected of them. And since Maria now is being raised in the United States, we have to make adjustments to our strategies of parenting. We can't use the same methods that we used in our country. I also told her that Maria understands that running away from home is a big safety concern, and she's working on finding other methods so that she no longer runs away and can find a new escape for her feelings. So Sylvia asked, like what?
Like deep breathing. There are some deep breathing exercises that she can try with you at home. And she also mentions listening to music in her room.
Estamos trabajando en algunos ejercicios de respiración profunda y María también ha mencionado escuchar música en su habitación.
Okay. Lo pensaré.
I'll think about it.
Okay. Connect with her by asking her questions about school, how's school going, and about life in general.
Ok, conéctese con ella y hágale preguntas sobre cómo va la escuela y de diferentes cosas en su vida.
Nunca me habla.
She never talks to me.
Yeah, sometimes kids don't want to talk or they don't know what to say, and that's okay, but keep trying. Keep trying gently in a kind voice, maybe doing something that the both of you enjoy doing.
Está bien y entendemos que muchas veces los adolescentes puede ser que no quieran hablar o no quieran responder preguntas, pero siga intentándolo con suavidad y con una voz amable. Y quién sabe, pueden hacer algo divertido que a ambas les gusta hacer.
Lo intentaré.
Okay, I'll try it.
Okay. It's a long one. I'm gonna pause there and let's take a few minutes and then we'll take a break. Thoughts, reactions, I'll pass it over as Amy. I'll pass it over to Amy and she can facilitate the discussion.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Yeah, that was a long video. Lots of things that we could potentially point out here. the cultural clinical dyad, right? Communicating with mom, sort of what's happening in therapy with Maria. Lots of things happen. What stood out? What did you see happen? Particularly when we're thinking about, this awareness piece, expanding awareness so mom can be on board and kind of know what's happening for Maria. General reactions.
One of my initial reactions is that it's such a tricky line to, even the way that we facilitate therapy, the way that we discuss options, they're all inherently US based and inherently may not be a great cultural fit for every family we work with. And I appreciate in the video an honesty of where our recommendations are coming from. A US place, meaning how do schools, how does broader society expect us to function, and just acknowledging that. I think in my mind, I would also want to provide space for families to name, like, I don't agree with that, or I don't like that that's what we're doing. And whatever reactions they might have, I think it could be heard as, you think I'm doing something wrong, my child thinks I'm doing something wrong, and you agree with them. And so I think, if anything, I would want to provide more space for any potential pushback around these US-based recommendations to maintain that relationship with families, so that the cultural broker can maintain an acknowledgement of, this is tricky to manage, right, any potential cultural differences or reactions to how we're doing therapy and the kind of recommendations we're offering.
Yeah, Pamela, I appreciate that so much, right? You're speaking to sort of how we speak to the acculturation gap, right? How our role is really to help youth sort of live the lives that are going to help them meet their goals and dreams. And that looks differently in a US context. That means that parents need to parent a little bit differently, right? That means that schools have different expectations for kids than what parents may have grown up with and may have experienced in schooling. So yes, I think any opportunity to open up conversation is the work of therapy, right? And I think you spoke to this last time too, but letting each person sit in their own expertise and find that middle path, so that, kids can be as successful as we know they can be. Thank you, Pamela. Betula, I see your hand up. You want to go for it?
Yeah, thank you. One thing that I have seen here working with Afghan kids and then talking to the families, it's we are, of course, TSTR more focused on youth and youngsters and kids, which is great work, but we should not forget the families they're coming with us, the family they're having issues with us. They're also going through a lot. They're also refugees. They're also people who are like, they're the first generation refugee who have very deep root in their society back in their country, wherever it was, and they were facing life threats and so many other things, war, famine, there's so many problems. And then they left all those things and came to United States, and now the elders are responsible for making a life from scratch for these kids. Like, kids' only responsibility is to go to school and focus on studies and have their basic needs, but elders are responsible to provide all these things. And when we, like TSTR team member or the therapist goes to them and talk to them from this privileged American prospect of, oh, we raise our kids like this, oh, you should be appreciative with your kids, oh, these all things are most of the time like adding another pressure to the parents. So I think there should be some amount of acknowledgement to the parents' struggle too, like, we know you are being through a lot. We know these all things are so difficult for them. So they know, okay, this is my responsibility, and I'm adding another thing to my responsibility completely out of my comfort zone, and then go ahead with it. I think this is one of the most important things to take care of, especially when we think like we are working beyond the kids, we're working with the environment and want to solve the trauma in the environment for the kids. provide an environment where kids can thrive and go ahead with their lives. Yep.
I think you're speaking so beautifully to like the level of empathy and humility that we need to walk into any caregiving system, right? Sort of appreciating all that caregivers are already doing, right? Appreciating all that they have been taught, appreciating the way that they are parenting in a way that is so in line with their culture and their beliefs, and sort of what we're actually asking caregivers to do when we ask them to do what in our minds might feel like, oh, this is just getting used to the US culture, right? Oh, this is the easy thing to help a kid feel better, right? Recognizing what that can actually feel like, given that there are changes in roles, right? Changes in power. There's so much that caregivers themselves have also lived through. So I think, walking so gently and so empathically and with such humility is just key, right? We cannot separate youth from their environments. And asking an environment or another person to change is also a huge ask that needs to be done very thoughtfully and carefully. I don't know if others on the team or on the call have other thoughts about that.
I just mentioned in the chat that I think this is huge. Like, being a parent is the hardest job, and then to parent in another context when you're acculturating differently is so challenging. And so just having that awareness of what it is that we are hoping to do and holding the goals and the value of the caregiver. The caregiver has oftentimes risked everything so to provide their child a better life. And that certainly didn't mean a disconnection, an inability to talk with your child, right? Not really understanding, but really the goal and the value is around making sure that they are successful in their life as they adjust here and keeping that connection. So making sure that we're explicitly tying what we're teaching and what we're talking about in therapy, that it resonates with the goals and the values of the family. So constantly tying those back, that this is to achieve their dream.
Okay, and then with that, I think this is a good place to pause. Let's take a 5-minute break. And then after the break, we're gonna go much more in depth with all the parenting stuff that's coming up, working more closely with caregivers, and show some more videos as well with Maria and her mother. So it's about 11:33. We'll see you back here at around 11:38. Everybody, I'm gonna just get started. So now we're gonna move into talking about safety-focused treatment, or Tier 4. And this is the home-based work with the family. And again, just as a quick reminder, here's the grid. We're in this phase of treatment. Like I said earlier, if we have any concerns around safety in the child's social environment, or in terms of how the child is regulating themselves and their survival state response. So things like an abusive caregiver or suicide are two kind of classic examples of this. Next slide. Okay, so parental trauma impacting parenting, right? So we know that caregivers, parents, they have their own trauma histories as well, and they came as refugees, as immigrants, as asylum seekers, and they're trying to create life here, and they've been through so much back in their home countries and during their journey here, whether it was in a refugee camp or whatever they've been through. And we know that when a parent has their own trauma histories, right? So we're not talking about the children anymore, we grow into caregivers. That's going to, of course, greatly impact how they parent, right? Their parenting styles. They're going to have their own triggers, right? They're going to have their own survival state response. I'm not talking about discipline, which is a little bit different, which is what we had talked about before the break. So this isn't about disciplining where they use a different method, but really parents who have their own triggers and their own survival state response, they may respond out of anger, right? More so than out of like, this is a disciplinary method I'm using, which is different, very different. And so that's something that we want to notice if that's happening and intervene and make sure that caregivers are getting their own therapy as well. We'll see a video clip of that in a little bit with Maria's mom. But it's going to impact how they set limits, how they keep kids safe, and how they discipline their kids as well. Of course, the acculturation gap, we can talk about just this all day, but just really quickly to acknowledge that children are acculturating much more quickly than their parents or grandparents. That's very common. They adjust to things faster. They're learning the English language much faster, the cultural norms much faster. They're navigating things like the internet, which is exposure to everything, and parents and caregivers. It's going to take a little bit longer. And so as a result of that, there's going to be conflict, right, between the generations. And we see that with Maria and her mom. It can really lead to a breakdown in communication, right, between parents and caregivers. And it really does it can result in poor parent-child relationship. And so much of what we can do as providers, as mental health providers, is really to help close this acculturation gap by having each of the generations understand what's happening, what the other is feeling, what the other is going through, and help them with their communication and their relationship. That's a big part of the Tier 4 work, but you can also do it in Tier 3 through phone conversations and things like that, as we saw before the break. And then parents and elders who are highly respected. This is also really critical, right? In many other cultures, the older generation, typically they receive so much respect, and they're treated as wise and all-knowing. And it's very common to have grandparents living under the same roof as children. Multi-generational homes are very common. But what can happen though with the migration journey and the acculturation process is that because typically the elderly take the longest to learn English and understand American cultural norms, that they feel more and more disempowered over time, parents and grandparents, right? They feel like they're no longer having that authority that they once did or that respect, and kids are taking the lead. Kids are kind of taking over there. They have this authority. They know what's going on. Maybe they've been interpreting, for us, which we definitely don't want that happening, but it does happen. And so this power that they once had is no longer there. And that's such a huge loss that we want to acknowledge and validate. They've done so much to get their kids here to build them a safe home and create all these opportunities, but then they also feel really disempowered as part of this process. And then corporal punishment. This is something that is very common, that physical punishment or spanking is a very common form of discipline across many cultures. And that here in the US, we have child protective services, we have the government intervening when there is concern around using physical discipline and physical punishment. And so this is not something that people are used to. And it can be really scary and confusing. And so a big part of what we can do is provide information, provide education, and provide also alternatives, other things that you can do. And we'll see, we saw a clip of that. We'll see more of that with Maria and her mom. And so our role, right, we're mandated reporters. We're also assessors. We're also educators. We're also providers. And so how do we navigate this really complicated issue? First of all, is it corporal punishment? Is it abuse, neglect? That's something that obviously CPS, DCF here in Massachusetts, DCF, that's what they need to assess and figure out. But we as the providers can play a significant role in terms of what we do, what we say, making sure that we are prioritizing safety and working collaboratively with caregivers. This is key, focusing on strengths and skills and intervening in a way that is culturally responsive. Okay, Jeff, this is you.
Thanks, Luna. So when thinking about the safety focus sessions, we're talking about home-based services with the family in the home, and again, as Luna mentioned earlier, be provided simultaneously with individual, school-based or outpatient-based regulation-focused treatment. So there are three components of safety-focused treatment. First is to prioritize and establish safety, and this includes activities that will ensure that the environment is safe, or a TSDR term, safe enough. Doesn't mean that everything is always perfect 100% of the time, but that we feel very confident that the environment is safe enough to facilitate continued growth and healing from trauma. Reducing survival states and maintaining safety. So activities that support the continuation of safe enough environmental processes. And this includes teaching of communication skills, pardon me, and caring for caregivers, which is activities that support caregivers, particularly teaching parenting skills in a new context. We'll talk about a tool called the Helper's Guide. So the clinical tools for safety-focused treatment. One is the safety-focused guide, and this is for all team members, and it provides concrete steps related to the primary safety-focused treatment goals. And again, with safety-focused interventions, there's often a high level of acuity, for example, harm to self or harm to others, or various types of dangerous actions or behaviors. There's usually a lot high anxiety on the family side and often on the clinical or cultural broker team. And so the more that we can be very concrete and have clear communication with everyone around like what happens when A, B, or C occurs, it reduces the anxiety and greatly increases the effectiveness of those services. And then the other component for supporting parents within the TSDR framework is called the Helper's Guide. HELP, that's an English language acronym for handling the difficult moments, enjoying your child, learning parenting skills, and planning for emergencies. And so this builds on the sort of path of US focused parenting strategies, and ones that are consistent with a lot of systems and often can be organized in such a way that can be pretty culturally responsive. Some of these may be newer to some parents, but often if organized collaboratively with parents, often can sort of meet everyone's goals. And so here's a zoom in if you're looking at in your either the physical workbook or on the PDF appendices of the safety focused guide. And you'll see here, like, how will the child's overall treatment strategy be used in safety focused treatment, and then implementing safety focused treatment. And this front part, the safe enough environment, is really focusing on establishing these very concrete pieces. So you as the clinician cultural broker team and then the family really understand what pieces we're trying to put in place, and then what do we do if you know, a bigger or high risk or more scary situation occurs. So we mentioned caring for caregivers, and there's a lot of evidence-based culture responsive models for supporting caregivers. Again, one of the things that's been talked about is giving feedback to parents about what to do for their kids, and then also how to support themselves is very complicated. It's like a very thin line to walk. And often at the center of it, parents see the value in this, and we can get there, but we want to be really mindful around how we give this feedback and how do we do it in a way that really feels that we're joining with them to try to uplift their hard work, their amazing resilience to continue to support their kid. And so, as I said, it includes handling the difficult moments. So it's essentially like coping ahead for when things are challenging. What skills can the parent use? So most high conflict situations in families are another one of these. It's not, oh my gosh, we're having conflict about homework or curfews or anything. These happen over and over again. And the more that families can cope ahead for, okay, in this type of situation, these are the one or two things that I can do. It can increase agency and then reduce the conflict in the family. Second one is enjoying your child. So creating intentional time for positive activities. We talked about in the regulating focus phase of the 4 R's, having positive time together, making dinner together, playing a game together, going for a walk together, and a little goes a long way. So 5 minutes, 10 minutes of some kind of planned activity where the goal is just being together can be incredibly powerful, both for the parent and or the caregiver and for the kid. Learning new caregiving skills. This is how do we both and, you know, okay, these are the strategies that you used to use. Which ones are working, which ones aren't working so much, and how do we build upon that with a lot of respect and humility? And then planning for emergencies. This is what 911 is. This is when 911 is okay to call. This is what the emergency room is. This is how to get there. This is when it's okay and appropriate to go there. Often some of this is learning around the US healthcare system and transportation system. And then some of it is learning, how do I best support myself and my kid when things feel more high action or more high stress? And now I'm going to turn it over to Luna and Amy for another video.
Okay, so what we're going to do now is show, we showed this, I believe it was on day one, just a couple of minutes of a planning meeting between the clinician and culture broker before they meet with Maria and her mom for an in-home tier 4 session. We're just going to show that again because it directly then translates into what they end up doing in the session. So as we're watching, questions for reflection, just some things to be noticing and paying attention to. These are also in the handout. What did the cultural broker and clinician discuss in the planning meeting, and how is this then applied during the session, right? Just to show how important those planning meetings are. How does the cultural broker and clinician manage conflict between Maria and her mom? When does the cultural broker take the lead and use her cultural expertise? When does the culture broker step in to interpret? And when does she allow more time for mom and Maria to talk, right? So this is like an incredible skill set that cultural brokers can build on, is interpreting, when to interpret, pacing, when to take a step back and let things happen, when to step in, you know what I mean? It's hard to teach, but we're going to demonstrate like just a moment when the cultural broker decides not to step in, but then at another moment she does decide to step in. So just pay attention to that. And then just anything else that you notice. So I'm going to now share screen. All right, so first, this is just a planning meeting between the clinician and cultural broker before they meet with Maria and her mom.
So today is another in-home session with Mom and Maria. When we last met with them, it was clear that Mom needed some help with implementing a structure with Maria at home and also setting limits without physical discipline.
Yeah, that's right. Mom understands she can't hit Maria, but she's unclear of what to do instead. But I think we can talk to her about that and, just work it out with her. And I think Maria should also be involved in setting the expectations and the structures at home.
Yeah, I agree. That approach seems to work best with teenagers. Now, what should we do if the conversation becomes an argument or becomes really tense?
The boyfriend issue is a big source of tension there. So in this case, I think we could pause and refocus the conversation on implementing structures, expectations, and limits.
Yeah, that sounds good. We can say, let's get back to that. Yeah. I think it's a good idea if you feel comfortable to come in to calm any tense situation. And if you're noticing cultural differences between how Mom is expecting Maria to behave versus how Maria expects an American teenager to be, then you can just come in. I want you to feel comfortable just stepping right in. You don't need to ask me for permission first. Loop me in after. And I'm there for support if you need a clinical lens. And I think if we can just focus the conversation on the emotions that they have after all this time, then we should be good. That should help.
Sounds good. So focus on Maria's feelings all these years without her mother.
Yeah, let's move away from attacking and blaming and instead focus on how each of them are feeling. Yeah, and I can provide some education on trauma and also some information as to why Maria might be behaving in the way she is.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay. So now we will watch the actual session itself. Hold on.
All right, so that's the idea.
And this is 12 minutes, but just sit back, relax, enjoy, pay attention to some of those questions that are in the handout.
Maria, we've been listening to some of your mom's concerns about safety, time with friends, and chores around the house.
María, hemos escuchado algunas de las preocupaciones de tu madre sobre tu seguridad y el tiempo con los amigos y ayudar con las tareas en casa.
One of the things that she shared with us is she would like you to always ask permission before you leave the house and come home at a set time.
Una de las cosas que ella nos ha pedido y nos ha dicho es que le gustaría que tú preguntes antes de salir de la casa y que después llegues a una hora adecuada.
Pero no puede ver a ese su novio, es problemático.
No es
Tú ves.
problemático, yo lo puedo ver si quiero.
Ok, detengámonos un momento, por favor. Vamos a enfocarnos en las limitaciones y expectativas y después podemos hablar sobre ver al novio. Okay, so they started arguing because mom does not want Maria to see her boyfriend. She says that he is trouble, but Maria, obviously doesn't think so. And I asked them to just focus on what the limitations of expectations are, and then we can talk about seeing the boyfriend. And they both agreed.
Thank you, Sophia. All right, so as far as the list of chores and expectations,
Okay, ahora esta es la lista de las tareas. ¿Qué es lo que te parece?
Es demasiado. Yo siempre tengo que hacer todo. Y su novio nunca ayuda. Él también ayudará o vive con nosotros de gratis.
Él ayuda y aportará dinero en cuanto encuentre un trabajo.
Sí, claro, él nunca se levanta del sofá. ¿Cómo va a encontrar trabajo si nunca busca?
Por favor, estamos otra vez desviándonos. Primero estamos aquí para enfocarnos en ustedes y después nos podemos enfocar en los novios, ¿ok? Okay. So Maria says that the list is too much and asks if mom's boyfriend will help her also because she doesn't feel that he does help at all. And mom says that he will help once he is able to get a job, to which Maria responds that how will he if it seems like he never looks for a job? So I asked them both to please focus on them. We're here to focus on them, and then we can focus on the boyfriends.
thank you again, Sophia. So Maria, what about the list of chores and expectations is too much? Please be specific.
Okay, María, ¿qué sobre la lista de tareas es demasiado? Por favor, sé específica.
Pues quiero simplemente ser un adolescente y divertirme. Pasé años cuidando a mis hermanos después de que ella se fuera. Y pues hacía todo. Creía que viniendo a los Estados Unidos iba a ser mejor, pero seguimos sin dinero y nos peleamos todo el tiempo.
She says she just wants to be a teenager and have fun. She spent many years in El Salvador taking care of her siblings, especially after her mother left. And she thought that life would be different once they got here to the US, but she says they still don't have money and now they just fight a lot.
Maria, would you like to tell mom what life was like for you when she left El Salvador?
María, ¿te gustaría también compartir con tu mamá cómo fue la vida para ti cuando ella se fue de El Salvador?
Sí, pues fue duro. Todos te echamos de menos y dijiste que nos traerías a todos pronto juntos, pero te estabas tratando demasiado tiempo, así que mejor me vine.
Yo también te eché de menos, María. Y las cosas tardaron más de lo que pensé en encontrar un trabajo y encontrar un lugar para vivir. Y yo estoy muy alegre de que estés aquí ahora conmigo y que me ayudes. La vida aquí es mejor. Y tú puedes ir a la escuela y tenemos suficiente para comer. Pero tú ya ni vas a la escuela.
Maria said that things were really hard and they all missed their mother so much, and that she had said that she was going to come and then bring everybody over, but everything was taking so long and she just couldn't wait anymore. So she came, and mom responded that she didn't realize everything was going to take as long as it did. It took much longer than she expected to find a job and find a place to live. But she's happy that she's here now and she's able to help her. That she is glad because life is better here. Now, they have plenty to eat and Maria can just go to school, which she couldn't do in El Salvador as much because of the dangers, but Maria doesn't go to school anymore.
It sounds like you both missed each other so much. And it also sounds like it was really hard for Maria when you left.
Parece que las dos se extrañaban mucho y que también las cosas fueron muy difíciles para María cuando usted se fue.
Maria, what would you like to change in your life? What do you wish was different?
María, ¿qué es lo que quisieras cambiar en tu vida? ¿Qué es lo que quisieras que sea diferente?
No lo sé. Supongo que solo quiero que mi mamá me deje en paz.
I don't know. I just wish my mom would leave me alone.
What do you mean?
¿Qué quieres decir?
No lo sé, como darme independencia y dejar de decirme cómo vivir mi vida.
Yo sigo siendo tu mamá y tú sigues siendo una niña. No, tú sigues siendo una niña y mi trabajo es protegerte.
Tú nos abandonaste y a ti no te importó protegernos en ese momento.
Tuve que irme para darnos una vida mejor a todos nosotros.
Okay, un segundo, déjenme traducir para Janet. So, Maria obviously wants to be left alone, and mom is saying that she still has to listen to her because she's her daughter and her job is to protect her. But then Maria says, well, when she left, she left her and all of her siblings. So she wasn't worried about being protected there. And mom responds, she's still a child. She's still her daughter. Yeah, that's her job.
Maria, it sounds like your mom cares about you very much and came here to create a better life for all of you.
Maria, suena como que tu mamá se preocupa mucho por ti y te quiere mucho. Y ella vino aquí para que tú y tus hermanos tengan una mejor vida.
And Mom, it sounds like Maria has a lot of anger about you leaving the family.
Y mamá, parece que María está muy enojada porque usted dejó a la familia entera detrás.
Si ella no me dijo cómo vivir mi vida todo este tiempo, ¿por qué cree que lo puede hacer ahora?
Sí, María, yo entiendo exactamente por qué estás tan enojada. Estuviste tantos años sola y de pronto llegas acá y ¿por qué de repente tienes que seguir las reglas de tu mamá? Esta es una situación que yo escucho muchas veces con los otros adolescentes con los que yo trabajo. Y además en tu caso, no tenías tanto control de niña sobre las cosas en tu vida y encima tenías tanta responsabilidad.
Sí, exactamente.
Entiendo y tiene mucho sentido, pero tú todavía tienes 15 años. Sigues siendo una niña. Lo que yo escucho de tu mamá es que ella está haciendo lo mejor que ella puede y te quiere mucho. Y ella solamente está tratando de protegerte y quiere hacer lo que ella piensa que es lo mejor para tu futuro y para que tú estés a salvo. Y tu mamá también, obviamente, María está muy afectada por las cosas que ocurrieron en el pasado. Entonces, ahora su trabajo tendrá que ser escucharla y tratar de entender qué es lo que le está pasando ahora.
Sí, yo puedo hacer eso, yo puedo escuchar.
So, I just, voy a traducir. So, Maria is obviously very upset, and I told her that I understand completely why she feels the way that she feels, because I mean, she was by herself for so many years. And then all of a sudden she comes here, and why should she have to follow her mom's rules? And not to mention in her case, she didn't really have much control over things when she was a kid, but she had so much responsibility on top of it. This is a situation that I hear about a lot of times, especially with kids that come here by themselves. But obviously I remind her that I understand, and it makes so much sense, but she's just 15 years old and she's still a child. And I'm just reminding her that her mom loves her so much and she's just doing the best that she can. You know, she's doing what she believes is the best for her daughter's future and for her safety. And now, you know, I also let mom know that Maria obviously has a lot of emotions because of everything that's happened in the past. So her job will be to try to listen and just understand so that she can see Maria and, you know, help her get through what she's going through now.
Thank you, Sophia.
And mom agreed she will do that.
Thank you for being willing to try.
Sí.
Okay. Stop share and hand it over to Amy.
So do we want to open it up, or are we jumping into breakout rooms, Luna? Sorry.
We're going to open it up here. We'll do breakout rooms for the next video.
Awesome. Okay, again, long video, lots happened in there. What are kind of general thoughts around, you know, we've been talking a lot sort of in this larger group around this cultural clinical dyad, this humility and respect for the acculturation gap and differences in parenting, addressing caregiver needs. What did we see in this video?
One of the things that I liked that I saw was that the cultural broker was able to, even when just speaking with the therapist, say like, this is something that I've seen a lot, almost to revalidate the family, but then also give a reason of like why there was so much dialogue between them before getting back to the therapist, so that everyone was kind of on the same page, because it seems like in that moment that was needed for her to do before like going back to the therapist and going back and forth. It was like, I need to handle this right now with these intense emotions.
Yeah, Brianna, thank you. I appreciate that reflection. I think this is what makes a cultural broker different, right, than a medical interpreter, is that it is also part of the work to address what's happening in the moment, right, and to really attend to how to understand and how to promote a dynamic of communication, right, between, a quadrilateral now, whatever it is, right? And so really figuring out, and again, this sort of happens in this pre-session meeting, right, around what are our roles. And here it was really nice to see the cultural broker feel like she stepped in. She said, I see what's happening here. I see what needs to be acknowledged. And the clinician took a step back and let it happen, right? And so really sort of putting the treatment goals at the center of the process. Thank you, Brianna. Anything else anyone wants to note?
I think one thing I wanted to add to that, Amy, Brianna, it's a great question, because in the video, again, if compared to if folks have seen a video on like medical interpretation, where it's like each sentence is very short, one thing for this type of clinical encounter to work, like Sophia and Janet, the clinician cultural broker, have a very close professional relationship and communicate a lot. And so they can also, I think, like those spaces where one person's sitting and sort of waiting, the more that the clinician cultural broker have a good and communicative connection, and, you know, they meet before and after, the more that those things can occur organically and they can each attend to it. And then you can have these more powerful experiences in a family dynamic like that. Back to you, Amy.
Thanks, Jeff. Betula, I see your hand up. Jump on in.
Yeah, thank you. Again, what I earlier mentioned, that it's not always only about the kids, it's about the parents and the caregiver too. They're also going through a lot. which we should consider. And another thing that's so important for a culture broker, if I'm a culture broker, to know about all these reasons, problem, why family being separated for, like in case of Afghan refugees, most of the Afghan refugees who arrived to United States last year, they left some of the family member back because of the chaotic situation in evacuation. And also culture brokers should know about the social fractures in the society, how it affects families' life. It's so important. So they can take this lead, the culture broker in Maria Cristo. It will be easy for you to step up and talk to the families and explain the situation, the broader social situation. If you don't have that knowledge, information with yourself as a culture broker, it will make your job difficult. And also, since clinician mostly they are only US based and US trained, they need to know about the client and their society, about the situation, what people been through, how family function, how the relation between family members, the kids, the caregiver, the husband and wife works in a society, which might make a lot of sense in so many difficult situations such as like this, when situation get tense between the child and the caregiver. So you know the broader prospect and you can explain it through that and then go ahead with your future plan.
I appreciate that so much, right? This needing to know what's happening outside of the room to be able to get a sense of what's happening inside of the room, right? Betula, what you're speaking to, right? It's like the argument's about the boyfriend, but it's not about the boyfriend, right? It's about all these other things that are happening between a youth and caregiver, but within the acculturation process, the stressors that are happening in countries of origin that are impacting youth and caregivers in different ways, right? All of that comes and plays out in this group of 4 people trying to make a plan about chores, right? And so being able to pivot, being able to step in when there's knowledge to be shared, and being able to take a step back, right? When something's happening that needs to happen, right? That I, perhaps as a clinician, don't need to be central in, but know that it needs to happen, right? I just thank you so much for that comment. Thank you, Elizabeth, too. I'm seeing your comments in the chat. And Nina, thank you for those reflections too, right? Decreasing pressure, working as a team, you know, being a co-therapist, right? Being a true dyadic partnership. Thank you. Any other thoughts, or does anyone from the team want to jump in?
Yeah, just to jump back to what Elizabeth and Nina in the chat are saying, that the clinician didn't know everything that was being said immediately, and I think the cultural broker did a really nice job of paying attention to like letting them have their connecting moment, and not having feeling that they have to interpret every single sentence, because again, it's not medical interpreting. You already said this, it's cultural brokering, and she can fill her in afterwards, right? That's why the debrief is so important. And we're going to show a debrief meeting about this, but you want to make sure that they're connecting, and that the cultural broker also, she does jump in, but she's not saying something new that hasn't already been said by the clinician. She's just reiterating it and re-summarizing it. So she's not being a clinician. We're not asking culture brokers to be a clinician. We're not doing that, because that's expecting something that should not be expected. But it could land differently coming from a cultural broker, right? I think a lot of this lands differently when you're talking to somebody that speaks your language. It looks like is from the same place that you're from, especially when you're working so closely with caregivers. And so the culture broker is just, again, reiterating, re-emphasizing, reinforcing what the clinician just said around validating both of their experiences, both of their emotions, anger. I did this for opportunities for you, but I'm angry, I'm mad that you did this. They're both true. Both can be true at the same time. And the culture broker is just reinforcing that. She's not being the clinician in this case. All right, should we keep moving?
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Okay, so just to finish this up, so in tier 4 sessions, we want to help caregivers set clear expectations with effective, safe, and consistent consequences, right? We want to teach that. We want to show alternatives to physical discipline if that's what's happening, or if there's a lot of yelling, things like that. And we want to acknowledge the acculturation gap. We want to validate all perspectives and sources of pain to build awareness and understanding between family members. That's the most amazing thing that we can do in these sessions, is build awareness and understanding and empathy between family members. Okay, so now we're going to watch another video clip. And for this one, I think we'll have time for breakout rooms. But we're going to, as we're watching this video, questions for reflection. Notice how the clinician explains the effects of trauma. How have you described the effects of trauma to caregivers? And how have you described depression, PTSD, any other diagnoses? And notice how the clinician and culture broker asked mom what she thinks of their understanding. Mom was open, but what if there was pushback or a different understanding of the cause? How could you respond? And these are questions that you'll talk about in your breakout rooms. All right, now stop share and then I'll share. Okay. And this is 10 minutes long.
It is important for family members to regularly speak to one another, asking questions like, how's school going? And learning about what's going on in life in general, to connect, listen, understand each other's experiences.
Es importante que los familiares conversen el uno con el otro, haciéndose preguntas sobre las cosas en la vida para que puedan entenderse y conocerse un poco mejor.
Children are sometimes going through things that adults don't understand. There's a lot of pressure in school, for example.
Hay veces que los padres no entienden las cosas que les están sucediendo a los chicos en la escuela. Hay veces que hay muchas presiones que ellos tienen, entonces puede que usted no sepa qué es lo que está pasando.
Sí, yo tengo mucho estrés y a veces no le hablo, no le pregunto nada. Y si nos vemos en casa, no sabemos qué decirnos.
She said that sometimes she's also really stressed out and she won't ask Maria anything. And then there are times that they'll see each other in the house and they just won't even talk because they won't know what to say to each other.
Yeah, we get that a lot with the families we work with. It's hard when you don't know what questions to ask. And it's also hard when the kids don't want to talk.
Sí, entendemos eso porque es un problema que lo vemos muy frecuentemente. Porque hay veces que uno no sabe qué preguntar y también es difícil porque a veces los chicos no quieren responder tampoco.
It is so clear that you love her and she has made it clear that she loves you. So we know you'll keep trying. It's not easy, but keep trying.
Es muy claro que usted la ama, María, y también es muy claro que ella la ama a usted. Entonces, necesita seguir intentando. Sabemos que no es fácil, pero tiene que seguir intentándolo. She'll do it, yeah.
You also shared with us that you can tell sometimes when Maria is angry or sad. How can you tell? And then how do you respond?
Usted también compartió que se da cuenta cuando María está enojada o triste. ¿Cómo es que usted se da cuenta, cómo lo ve y cómo responde?
Ella hace muecas, una mueca y se va. Y solía gritarle y entonces ella solo se iba.
She makes a face and then she leaves. I used to yell at her and then she would just leave.
I wonder if the yelling is a trigger, meaning when you yell, it brings back memories from the past that are scary for her. And when she's scared, it makes communication hard. So you get stuck in a cycle.
nos preguntamos si cuando usted le grita es un detonante para ella. Y, o sea, básicamente que le trae recuerdos negativos del pasado y que esos recuerdos después la hacen que ella se sienta asustada y que después cuando se asusta la comunicación se pone aún más difícil y después se quedan atrapadas en un ciclo.
It may help to have Maria come in later and speak to her with us here to help you improve communication. She might need you to say sorry for some things that happened in the past and forgive.
Yeah. También ella pregunta que qué tal si después viniera María y conversara con usted y podría conversar las dos sobre cómo se siente y por qué y de esa forma ella pueda perdonarla también a usted. Pero ¿qué es lo que usted piensa de nuestro análisis?
What do you think? See, Maria's not a bad kid. She's been through some tough stuff like you. And she's hurt, but the hurt is on the inside, so it's hard to see. And she deals with her hurt by running out of the house and shutting down.
María no es una niña mala, en realidad es una niña muy espectacular, pero ella está dolida, ¿no? Y desafortunadamente no podemos ver ese dolor, está adentro. Y la única forma que ella sabe lidiar con ello es saliéndose de la casa.
When families have experienced violence and trauma, it does affect them, and they can feel sad, angry, confused.
Cuando las familias han experimentado con trauma, ellos, los puede afectar mucho, pueden sentirse enojados, tristes.
Sometimes some people can feel what we call depressed, which is too sad to want to do anything. And some have PTSD, which is when memories from the past come up into the mind and dreams that are upsetting.
Algunas veces esas familias que han pasado por las cosas, o en realidad todos podemos sentirnos deprimidos, que es básicamente cuando están demasiado tristes para poder levantarse y hacer algo, o si no pueden experimentar con TPT, que básicamente significa que las memorias o las cosas que te han causado miedo en el pasado se hacen presentes ahora y pueden aparecerse en las pesadillas o en cualquier evento durante el día.
So even though we're in the present and not in immediate danger, our minds are saying we are in danger, and different people react in different ways. So while many people may go through the same thing, some people adjust well and others struggle.
Y la cosa es que justamente por eso puede ser que uno en el presente no esté en peligro, pero por las cosas que ha experimentado en el pasado, aunque diferentes personas pueden pasar por algo, los que han pasado por el trauma puede ser que reaccionen de una forma muy diferente justamente por el trauma que han experimentado.
What do you think of our understanding?
¿Qué cree de nuestro análisis?
Pues sí, tienen razón y nosotros pasamos por muchas cosas antes de venirnos aquí, ¿no? Y tuve muchos problemas con el padre de María y no teníamos un lugar donde vivir. Y sí, tenemos mucho estrés las dos.
Yeah. She says, they went through a lot and they had a lot of difficulty with her ex-husband and they didn't have a place to live. And, they have a lot of stress, the two of them. Yeah.
Y la otra cosa es que también creo que a veces soy como María, porque yo tengo pesadillas y a veces me siento con miedo, así de la nada, sin que esté pasando algo. Y también creo que yo también me enojo, así como María. Y no sé qué debo hacer en ese momento.
Yo creo que los padres también tienen que sanar, no son solamente los niños. El trauma no solamente afecta a ellos, sino a los adultos. Entonces, si usted quisiera, tenemos también terapeutas o consejeros que podríamos conectarlo para que usted también tenga su tiempo de mejoramiento. ¿Qué piensa?
Sí, yo creo que sí, tal vez sí.
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 So mom shared that she also, sometimes feels like Maria. She's been through a lot, and sometimes, just like Maria, will get mad or scared at moments when there seems to be nothing present. And I shared with her that sometimes parents also need to heal, and that trauma doesn't just affect the children; it's also the adults. So I said that there are therapists that we could connect her with if she would be willing to do so, and she is. So it's good.
Okay, so we're gonna stop there. And we're gonna now go into breakout rooms. And if we can have those questions right in the breakout rooms for people to talk about with your group partners, just in terms of what you notice, any of the videos really, but just general time and space to talk with a smaller group about some of these sessions, how the clinician was talking about some of these different diagnoses, how mom responded, and how they're getting her to get her own individual therapy. Is this stuff that you've done in your own work? Is it different? Any questions you have, opportunity to talk. And we'll see you back in about 7 minutes.
I think that's everyone. I'm curious, I'm sort of looking at the team at Children's, how we want to go about sharing out. Maybe I would love to hear from at least 2 groups. Does that sound like a good benchmark to hit? Love if someone was feeling super brave. We're like rounding the bend. We're almost there. But we'd love to hear kind of what some of you were talking about. So who wants to be brave? Thanks, Danielle.
Yeah, so I think one really important thing that came out of our conversation was not rushing therapy, and really giving caregivers a chance to understand what trauma is and how trauma impacts them as the caregiver, how it impacts their child, instead of, you know, trying to force them to understand it in that first session. You know, we really need to slow it down and take our time. And I'm sorry, I don't remember specifically who said it, but, you know, we always kind of want to rush therapy and see results right away. And caregivers want to see results right away. So we have to remind them that they also need to kind of, you know, set realistic expectations and slow things down a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Danielle, and your group. Timing is key, pacing, right? And when, you know, when there's interpretation involved, right, we talk a lot about less is more, right? Like even, you know, we're asking caregivers to set reasonable expectations. We as providers in this dyad also need to set a reasonable expectation of like, what can we do in one sitting, right? What can we do within a month? And just being like thoughtful and curious with each other is so key. Thank you, Danielle, for that.
Yeah, and saying the same thing over and over and over again until slowly it's like, oh, you know, like you're saying the same thing, the impact of the past, how that affects the present. I mean, I probably say that 40 times, you know, before it's like, oh, you know what I mean? It starts to kind of sink in. So just saying it once doesn't mean you're done. Check. It's not, you have to meet them where they are. And it's such a slow process. And that's why when people want to see results fast, I always say, you know, it's been a lifetime of struggle. It's probably going to be a lifetime of healing. And we're going to be, you know, we're going to play a role in that and we're going to help move things along, but it's not going to happen, you know, in a couple of meetings. It's just not possible. So we want to set realistic expectations as well.
We have another brave soul in Zoom land who wants to share what came up in their group.
I can share.
Thank you. Yeah.
Sure. Something we talked about is just kind of the word trauma and how heavy it is, and how that translates, you know, in other languages and other cultures, or like how a parent would define that or what they think it is versus their child even.
Yes, huge. It's a word that exists in the English language. It doesn't exist in other languages. It's a concept that is still like heavily really stigmatized. You know, people don't understand. It's a heavy word. It's a big word. And so I think, Diana, what you're speaking to is really working together as a dyad to figure out how do we present what needs to be presented so we feel like we're offering something helpful. Right? Like it doesn't mean anything to read a DSM diagnosis. It doesn't mean anything to check it off our list, right? That we provided psychoeducation, but it's really about how do we help a youth and a caregiver, a family system understand what is happening for them and why what's happening makes sense, right? That's the trauma lens, right? Why what is happening makes sense, how that's impacting behavior, how that's impacting the relationship, right? So we bring these terms into the room, into sessions to help create a mutual understanding and to be curious together about a mutual understanding, right? So that word might not enter the room and that's okay. And that word might enter the room and it feels really bad. And so we back up, like Luna said, and we try again. So I just appreciate that this given, right? We talk about trauma all the time in these trainings, but it's not a given that we bring it in this way, right, to our work. I appreciate that, the level of care and thoughtfulness that you need as a dyad, right, to bring this up for families is just so important.
Great. We should keep moving. We have just a little bit more left and we're very close to the end. So let's put the slides back up, Jeff, and we have one more very short video to show a debrief meeting between the two, between the dyad partner that we want to show. Go ahead, Jeff. Thank you. Okay, so tier 4 session debrief video. Again, this is going to be a short, I think it's only about a minute or two, and just pay attention to kind of what they're talking about, what they're touching base about during the debrief meeting, okay, and why it's so important.
That was intense.
Yes, it was. I am really glad that we were able to get together first and, plan for how the session would go.
Good. Yeah. Did I miss anything?
No, I was able to translate everything, but I had to step in a lot because they were just arguing too much.
Yeah, thank you for doing that. And thank you for looping me in after. I appreciate that. It sounded like it was helpful that you shared your personal lived experience. So that was good.
I think they're starting to, maybe see each other's side a little bit better. They seem to be getting softer toward the end.
Yeah.
Yeah, almost like they were understanding each other more so.
Okay. So do you think that they understand each other's emotions about what happened in the past?
I think they're starting to, yeah.
Good. Good. And I also think that it's amazing that mom is now thinking about going to counseling herself.
I was so happy to hear that. Yeah. And, I think I can help her get her own therapist with her own cultural broker. The good thing is that now I'm a little more connected in the community, and I know of an organization that has other Spanish-speaking therapists.
Great. Yeah, you've done such a wonderful job in helping her understand the impact of trauma, given that the community doesn't talk about it. Yeah, you had a big role there. So I'd like to check in with you. I think you did amazing, by the way. And there was a lot of emotion in that room. You had a really big job.
Yeah, I was really glad that I had the time to think about what I felt comfortable sharing about my personal story. It was kind of difficult to see myself as a referee in that situation because I've seen this kind of tension before with other families that I've worked with and even with my own.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it brought up a lot of things for me.
I would like to make sure that you feel supported and that you have everything that you need, that you can take care of yourself. So is there anything that you need?
Not that I can think of. I'm really glad that I have time between that session and my next session. I think I'll take a walk. That might help. And at this point, I think I'll bring this to my network of other cultural brokers and get some peer support.
That sounds like a good idea. Can I do anything to help?
Not really, but thank you. I think it's great and it's super helpful that we have this time before and after the sessions. I'm glad that we're prioritizing it because it makes me feel more grounded and more prepared so that I'm not just there translating, but I can also be a cultural broker.
Okay. Yeah, so I think, the idea that cultural brokers are, they've got their own lived experience, some of them might have their own trauma histories, and that secondary traumatic stress is going to be really important thing to pay attention to and making sure that they have the supports, the supervision that they need, the peer supports that they need to do this job well and to take care of themselves. So why is debrief important? It's an opportunity to reflect on what happened, to check in about what may have been missed during the session. Important to keep secondary traumatic stress, STS, in mind. And then it's also an opportunity to plan for next steps, right? Given what just happened, what should we do next? What phone calls do we need to make? What should we do next time? You know, those kinds of things. So it's just critical. And the before and after it only has to be a few minutes, but even just taking like 5 minutes, 3 minutes makes the quality of the 40 minutes that you might have with the child or with the family that much stronger and that much more rich. So it's worth it. I know people think, oh, it's time, I don't have the time, but it's going to be worth your time because then the quality of the session is just that much better. So I'm going to stop there and pass it over to, I believe, Alicia.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, Luna. Wow. I just learned so much today. I love that. Thank you everyone for the conversation and thoughtfulness as we moved through. So what's next? Well, somebody is going to put the link to the evaluation for today in the chat, and we would love for you to spend a few minutes to fill out that evaluation to help us improve this training. It's a lot of information to deliver throughout this. So this is focused on today, day 3. And then for all of you who are associated with a program that is rolling out TSTR, you will continue, you're probably joining some consultation calls at this point. Hopefully you know who your TSTR consultants are. We have many on the training today, myself, Luna, Jeff, Amy, I'm sure Doris, like you've seen our friendly faces. So we'll continue to have consultations with your program. We welcome questions, comments, things that you're grappling with. Please reach out to us. So things for, okay, great, Amy. Thank you, Amy, for putting in the information about CEUs in the chat. But anyway, so that's what's next, is to continue to, collaborate with your TSTR consultants to work on your programs. For those of you who are not necessarily connected to a TSTR program, please read the book, look at the trainings, reach out to us if you have questions or you want additional resources. There's a lot of stuff available to you. And we